Mass arrests have been made in a number of Egyptian universities as another academic year begins. New laws don't seem to have silenced those intent on making their voices heard. But can heightened security measures alone succeed in curbing the growing anger among students? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mike Hanna. It's the start of a new academic year in Egypt and the start, too, it appears, of renewed protests by groups of students. They've held rallies in universities across Egypt, frustrated with what they describe as increasingly repressive measures by police. And they're demanding the release of fellow students who were arrested for taking part in previous rallies. Egypt's President Abdel Fattah El-Sisi spoke to students just a few weeks ago to mark the beginning of a new term, and he warned them against getting involved in political activities.
As a new school year begins, I call on university students to focus only on your learning in order to promote your scientific and cultural knowledge. Stay away from malicious activities, some of which are disguised in bad values, and that aim at suspicious political ends that serve outside groups and seek to destabilize this nation.
Well, the Egyptian government was prepared for the possibility of new student protests. It intensified security measures at universities ahead of the academic year. Metal detectors and cameras were installed, and private security guards were hired to search students. Students at al-Azhar University in Cairo say they've had to sign forms that stop them from getting involved in political activities. Egypt's cabinet has also empowered university presidents to expel faculty members who, quote, disturb the educational process. And last November, the government passed a law that outlaws any protest that does not have official sanction. Well, for our discussion today, we're joined by, here in the studio, is Mahjoub Zweri, Professor of Contemporary Middle East History at Qatar University. In London, Adel Darwish, a political editor of Middle East magazine. Well, welcome to you both. Let's begin with Adel Darwish. Why are students perceived as such a threat at present in Egypt?
I'm not quite sure, actually. I read anyway as a threat, but students' protest is nothing new. We've seen what's going on in Hong Kong, here in London, where there was a march, there's the students there. I mean, students usually in the forefront of any sort of movement or protest, and it's quite difficult. I mean, there's no scientific way or even accurate way of measuring what they're protesting about, because there's no opinion polls. I mean, if you read majority of Egyptian newspapers, which I don't know is about 70 odd you can get online, God knows how many television, radio stations, you see some of them taking one side or another, and obviously minority, a pro-Muslim Brotherhood. But none of them has actually conducted an opinion poll among students, among protesters, to find out in simple way, as we understand it here in Fleet Street, for example, what they are protesting about. What I gather is obviously the Muslim Brotherhood group, or pro-them, are protesting as the status quo per se. Then they have the normal sort of secular ones protesting against the actual law itself of prohibiting demonstration without prior agreement. And we can discuss that later, because that was, again, an unwise law. Like in Britain, you cannot actually have a demonstration without getting a permission first from the local authority and from the local police and from the various authorities, and that they should have left it at that. Get a permission first rather than having a law prohibiting it, and so on. So as I said, it's difficult really to know what they're protesting about.
Well, Mahjoub Zweri, your view, what do you think these protests are about?
There is a political context for that. Egypt is in the turmoil of real change started 2011, and that a different chapter of this kind of change. What we witnessed is actually sort of a new chapter of this kind of changed. The students always, the student community in each country, they represent a very strong body because they are, they have more hopes, aspiration. And taking into consideration the situation in Egypt, they were feeling that they were marginalized. Their opinion, they're not taken into consideration. Politically speaking, thousands of them, they are in prison from their friends or colleagues. And more important is actually this kind of securitization of the universities in Egypt. That atmosphere, the securitization of the education atmosphere by different legislation and issues you raised in your introduction have complicated the whole situation, where basically they delay the opening of the university 3 weeks, hoping that things will be settled. The students seem not happy of all of that, basically with all of these measures taken into consideration, and looking at university as a platform for a real political debate, for a real and healthy political debate. What happened in last, I would say, 9 months is actually making the university an unhealthy place for political debate, and actually forbidden and create obstacles before any political activity. I think the idea of securitization, the education atmosphere, has complicated the whole political scene in Egypt.
Yes, Ed El-Darwish, the concept of the student, as you mentioned, they will be at the forefront of protests in any part of the world. In Egypt, many believe that there are very real issues that need to be protested against, and yet the focus of the current Egyptian administration is to keep these voices quiet. And yet, despite all these measures, it doesn't appear to be succeeding at this point.
Well, I mean, it's again, whether it's a security issue or not. I mean, when I went to SOAS here in London a few years ago, my old college, School of Oriental African Studies, I was quite horrified that you have to go through metal detectors, that you have to sign your name and so on, which wasn't the case when I was a student 45 years ago or so. So I think the whole security measures is not really monopoly of the Egyptians, who are, let's not forget, fighting quite really security issues to do with terrorism, not just in Sinai, but also happened in urban areas. And as said, because still Parliament has not been elected, still the proper debate is not actually going into the normal channels, which is Parliament and political parties, and who is competing for attention of public opinion, who is actually competing for the votes. So it's still not happening there. And as the professor correctly said, it is the students there are a body ready. Someone can stand a microphone after a lecture or something, and quite a few hundreds, big 12 to 2,000-3,000 behind him or her. So is it really a debate? Is it really a parameter that we can actually judge what's really going on? The answer, of course, is debatable.
Well, I'm joined now on the phone from Alexandria by Yusuf Salhen. He's a spokesperson for the Students Against the Coup movement. Welcome to you. Yusuf Salhen, why are the students protesting? What would you say is the fundamental reason for their ongoing dissent?
Sure. The students all over the country, the thousands of students are protesting for many reasons, including there are 1,800 students in prison so far during the coup regime government. And also the procedures have been taken by administrations of universities. They want to prevent students from protesting. They want to humiliate them by new security checking on their cell phones, checking them by their hand inhumanely. So that's all. And also, the 200 students killed last year by the military and coup forces. So that's all has been a violation and absence of students' rights. And then students are not satisfied with what's happening in Egypt generally.
Well, Majib Zuhairi, you're hearing there a list of complaints, a number of issues that students are banding against. Do you think that there could be the possibility that the authorities engage with them rather than attempt to curb their protest?
The lesson learned in last year do tell us that there is no way for engagement between the student and the political system, the post-coup system. But basically, because the new political system in Egypt is building itself based on dividing the society, and dividing the society of Egypt has caused more problems within Egyptian society, where basically they were promised to have a better life, a better security, than what they were seeing under Morsi. They were promised to have better economic situation. All of this is being delivered, not delivered by the government. The government with Sisi failed to deliver to the people. Just the problem of electricity itself does show you how much the Egyptian people is suffering under this government. More important, the student in the university basically, even under Mubarak, they were enjoying political rights better than what they are enjoying now under Sisi. And they were comparing between why this revolution took place on 2011, and all of that we have to go back to 40 years ago. So basically there is a real debate. Maybe we cannot see it, but the demonstration started last Saturday did tell us that there is something underneath of the society. There is level of division, level of hatred, level to the regime. But basically, there is a solid power behind it, which basically the people who lost hope of this political system. And I think without understanding this, it's difficult to see that the government can engage with them, because the government does not see that the problem is with the student. They see the problem with Muslim Brotherhood as they are the main political power pushing those students, but they don't see their own failure to deliver to the people in Egypt.
Adel Darwish, your view of that protest by the students is in fact a tip of an iceberg of national discontent which is not being addressed?
A couple of things. I don't think the professor have got any evidence really that I have seen to what he said regarding that the government deliberately is dividing society. I mean, it's really sort of, I'm just trying to struggle not to laugh here. There's no evidence actually to see. I mean, I wouldn't publish that in my newspaper as a journalist. Secondly, the young gentleman from Alexandria, I couldn't quite understand what he was saying. He's suggesting that actually there's a military in the streets containing the students. I didn't quite catch what he meant, or does he really think that he knows on every University of Alexandria what every student think? I mean, again, we have to be a little bit more grown up and more responsible as journalists. As for the protest at the tip of an iceberg, I'm not quite sure. Since Colonel Nasser's coup in 1952 and ending parliamentary democracy, there's no parliamentarian system. It became presidential system, and also created a Stalinist-style public sector and dependency on the state. So they're looking into the state for security in terms of food subsidies, subsidized commodities, in terms of providing jobs, and totally nobody thinking. You hardly would see. You probably would see 100,000 students demonstrating to get employment or get free accommodation. But you will hardly find 10 students or 10 graduates coming up with a project and going to a bank manager and say, we have this project, give us $1 million and let's actually have this economic enterprise, as it was the situation between 1922, for example, and 1954. So it's a way of thinking that the public opinion makers in Egypt need to rethink it. And secondly, I doubt if this demonstration can be called debate. Debate is something else. Debate that sort of the media, intellectuals, seminars, political parties should actually engage in. I watch the talk shows in Egypt, I watch these debates, and all of them concentrating what would the government do rather than changing the way of thinking, going into free market economy, going into amending the constitution. You have a parliamentary representative democracy where the government is directly elected, as we have in Westminster, which existed actually in Egypt until 1954.
Well, let's just go to Yusuf Saleh on a couple of points here. Specifically, Yusuf Saleh, that issue that was brought up by Professor Zoueri, that what you are seeing in demonstrations by students is a culmination and is an indication of a far deeper dissent within the society that goes far beyond the university campuses. Your view of that?
Right. I just want to say, first of all, the only engagement that I know from the authorities with the students are killing and mass detention and mass killing and torturing inside prisons. That's the only engagement I know about. That's first of all. Secondly, universities around the whole world are the places where students exercise their rights, they exercise whatever they want to do after they graduate, whether it's political or economical or whatever related to any aspect of life. But what I know is that priorities of students in Egypt have changed. They are freedom fighters. They want to have their rights. They just want to take it. They're not only demanding for it. So the problem is, if the professor can find evidence, I just recommend if he Googles and finds students being beaten and killed, and there is no single student in Egypt who haven't witnessed killing and mass detention and mass crackdown in every single university in Egypt just for protesting peacefully against the current bloody regime.
Well, Majid Zoueri, I want to come with you actually just first of all to respond to Adel Darwish's comments about can you show the evidence of intents to divide the society, a conscious action by the current administration to do so?
I mean, if you just look at the media in Egypt and look how the media has created sort of division within the society by dividing the society, good people and bad people who are with the regime, bad people who are against the regime, and then moving that discourse everywhere within the society, university, schools, business, and those are good people or good guys, they will be with the regime, they will benefit from the regime, and those bad guys, they will be maybe in prison or somewhere else. So that happened the last year. I mean, there are a lot of evidence how many people in prison in Egypt, how many people haven't went to the court yet. How many? What the government did in term improving the economy of Egypt, improving its own foreign policy. Egypt is isolated politically because of it is a performance region. Someone will say, look what's doing in Gaza, what was doing, and with ISIL. These are small events in a big picture. Egypt always used to play a big role and always used to be a nation. Now Egypt, under this current regime, is actually falling apart because basically there are people who they now disbelieve, they have sort of lack of trust of the military institution, of the economy, of all of those people who are so-called political elite. So the division can be seen everywhere in Egypt. And I think there are a lot of evidence that Egyptian government, Egyptian people, they are not enjoying the same unity used to enjoy 10 years ago at least.
Well, I'll come to Adel Darwish first, but I first want to go to Yusuf Salem for his response to what we just heard there from Majid Zoueri.
All right. What I think is the students are taking this position to announce and declare they're not satisfied with what's going on, and there is nothing worse than being killed and detained, even haphazardly in the universities. So I tell you one small thing. If there is a small group of, let's assume there's small group of students who want to express their opinion and they're protesting in the campus, and then the police and security storms in, they kill and detain anybody haphazardly because they're all students, they all look alike, they're not labeled as protesters or non-protesters. They're all, actually, I want to say the coup government and regime has unified all and united all students under the anti-coup movement, because we know even those students who want to go just to take classes, they recognize that they might be killed or detained at any point. So now we just want to live our lives freely without being threatened, being killed and detained at any moment.
Well, Adel Darwish, the argument, for example, that in attempting to curb the dissent through security measures, the administration is in fact increasing that dissent. It has the opposite effect, some would argue, of what it is intended to do. Your view?
Well, when we heard about the evidence of division, the professor referred to the media and referred to foreign policy, particularly ISIS and Gaza. I mean, first of all, of my 47, 48 years as a journalist, I don't recall foreign policy deciding an outcome of an election, unless a country is at war and effectively affecting it. It's always economy. So we can rule out them, and it cannot be even a reason for division. How many people would demonstrate about Gaza or ISIS in Egypt compared to demonstration about sort of removing the subsidy in commodity or increasing the price of train fares or whatever? Secondly, when he says the media, again, out of something about 100 odd newspapers and publications, it's only about 3 owned by the state, and they're not really great circulation. And same goes for television stations. And as you and I know, the media is actually about increasing the sales of your newspapers, increasing circulation, or increasing your viewers, regardless of the political issues. Let's not beat around the bush. So I don't think there's sort of enough reasons for here to go by.
If I may, Adel, I'll take those points,
Yeah,
but
sure.
the specific question was whether curbing dissent by using security measures may not bear the danger of actually encouraging it. Your view on that?
Well, is it dissent as it was during the Soviet Union style, sort of this and there, or is it a mass demonstration? Again, there's no elected parliament yet, and you have a president who's elected on a massive wave of popularity. It just doesn't make sense to me, unless he is on a politically suicidal mission, to increase his unpopularity or sort of erode away his popularity. So it seemed to be the contradiction within the question itself. One can write a long essay about it. But I probably might not actually tend to agree as an observer with this view.
Okay, well, Mahjoub Zoueri, that issue of dissent, that issue of repressing dissent, actually intensifying it, what's your belief on that?
You know, at the end of the day, what we are witnessing in the last 24 hours or not 2 days, that the government is using one only tool has in hand, which basically the security measures, which means basically the government don't think of any other measures, or they don't have a plan actually for other measures, where basically the reaction will be actually more demonstrations, the reaction will be more criticism to the government, maybe even from outside, because basically if the government, if this security measures has not been respected by students, if the students continue to attack those the company which been working now on security in the university, there will be more criticism to the government, where basically the government has to find a way. The gap will be wider and wider between them and the students. The university environment will be more securitized, and it will be difficult to have even a normal education process, which basically will lead to a real failure of the education system as a whole in Egypt, which basically I see it's the target now, it seems, from the current government.
Yusuf Salam, very quickly, the thing that we discussed right at the beginning of the show before you joined us on the telephone, why do you believe the Sisi government sees the student movement as such a threat?
I'm wondering what's the problem if students are protesting peacefully, holding signs or chanting. Where is the problem? What's the danger they are putting the state in to be killed and detained? That's my question. And we are really scared of students, because when they protest and the whole world is watching what's happening in campuses, it is the only place now left in Egypt that only students can gather up in. We cannot prevent that from happening. They try to stop it. They try to put obstacles and barriers, but still, we have the right to gather up every day in the academic year in our campuses. We wish they can cancel the academic year, but still, students can gather up. They can block streets. The government can block streets, can block squares, and it's the situation here. But we cannot block campuses and students from going to their universities and asking for their rights, not asking, but taking the rights and asking for the rights of their friends, their families, their professors. All people have been killed, detained, and tortured, and this is going to be continuing process.
Well, at that
Standing
particular
together
point,
to-
my thanks to our guests. On the phone from Alexandria, Yusuf Salen. In London, Adel Darwish. And here in the studio with me in Doha, Mahjoub Zoueri. Thank you to you all. And please feel free to add your voice to this discussion. You can leave your comments at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. We're also on Twitter. Look for @AJ Inside Story. I'm Mike Hanna. Thanks for watching, and goodbye for now.